Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this very special review of the Innsmouth Conspiracy for Arkham Horror, the card game. The Innsmouth Horror might be my favourite Lovecraft story, so I was very excited to see how the Innsmouth Conspiracy handled that excellent source material. The creepy town of Innsmouth, full of suspicious people with a certain fish-like quality to them, and the townsfolk with their absolute hostility to outsiders. Plus the secrets they're keeping of what's actually out there in Devil's Reef, and what lies in the caves under the township. Now, the Innsmouth Horror is peak Lovecraft. Is the Innsmouth Conspiracy peak Arkham Horror? Let's bring the lights up.
It's locked. Probably bolted on the other side. He's awake in there. I can hear him moving about.
Break the door down, you damn fool.
This review contains a ton of spoilers for the Innsmouth Conspiracy. Viewer discretion is advised. The Innsmouth Conspiracy is the 6th campaign that Arkham Horror put out, and it was the last one to be released in installments. That means we don't have a handy big box for this campaign for me to point at, but based on current timelines and how Fantasy Flight Games is handling Arkham Horror at the moment, you should expect to see a big box of this come out about this time next year, maybe earlier. Until then, it's probably going to be a bit of a pain to pick up. So why are we covering it now? Well, because you voted for it. You voted for this one to be the campaign we did after the Scarlet Keys. Well, maybe not you directly, but you as a collective group of people who watch my Arkham Horror videos and vote on the polls. And on that note, the next one is going to be Hemlock Vale, because of course it's going to be Hemlock Vale. That one just came out. But let's get back to the Innsmouth Conspiracy. A campaign I found at times absolutely brilliant, but a campaign that just didn't quite stick the landing. Let's go through the various parts of the campaign. Now, for starters, I've gone through the Innsmouth Conspiracy twice now. The first time was in person with my friend Fraser and my other friend Jared, and I played in that campaign Tony Morgan. I was the main grunt and dealing with the enemies that were rushing in. Fraser was playing a clue-getting Patrice deck, and Jared was playing a flex deck, which was Diana Stanley, with a lot of cancels and stuff. The second time through, I played it solo, two-handed, and I was playing as Trish Scarborough, who was our clue-getter, and with Zoe Samaras, who was our fighter. So that is my experience with the campaign, going through twice with those sets of characters. Let's talk about some of the features of the campaign. The first of these features is delayed XP. Now, the way the campaign is structured is there are flashback missions, and then there are missions happening in the current time, and you're trying to piece together your memories during the flashback missions. One of the mechanical consequences of this campaign structure is they don't want you spending XP just before a flashback mission. And I get it from that point of view, like from a purely artistic point of view, that makes some sense. But from a fun point of view, it's not exactly the best decision here. And it really has two main consequences. The first one is it slows down your overall feeling of progress that you get in Arkham Horror. One of the fun things about this game is experience. It is getting new cards or upgrading cards within your deck to take the idea you had at game start and make it better, stronger, and more efficient. That's one of the big things that draws people into the Arkham Horror card game experience. Making decks that do stuff that are fun. And the delayed experience is a bit of a handbrake on that. It's a bit of a, actually no, we're going to hold your XP back, so you have to play with the same deck 2 missions back to back. It's not that bad, but it is, I think, needless in many ways. And I don't think you'd lose much of the feel of the campaign if you were allowed to spend that XP anyway. The second problem I found with it is you really have to do the first half of the campaign with bugger all XP. Like, figure out how to make your deck work with under 10 XP, because that's the amount you're going to be running the first 4 scenarios with, most likely. Then at the midpoint, you'll get a whole bunch more XP and be able to ratchet your deck up, but you're going to have to do the nuts and bolts of the campaign probably with 10 or under XP. And I know there's a lot of deck combinations, a lot of ideas that don't really come on stream until you're hitting like the 15 to 20 XP mark. So straight away, a recommendation after playing this through twice is pick characters that are good out of the box. If you want to do well, don't think about an Amina deck that's going to take like 24 XP worth of stuff to kit her up, because you're probably not going to get that until like mission 7. The second feature of the campaign I want to talk about are flashbacks. Now, flashbacks are almost like stretch goals, but they're a main way to get experience points and advantages in this campaign. So you can complete most of the scenarios in the campaign pretty easily if you ignore doing the flashbacks. but the flashbacks are where you get bonus XP, and you also get to manipulate the Chaos Bag. Now, this campaign starts off with a pretty rough Chaos Bag. It has 2 skulls, 2 cultists, 2 broken tablets, and 2 elder things out of the box. So 20 tokens in the Chaos Bag, and 9 of them are pretty hairy and ugly. But as you do the flashbacks, you not only get rewarded with XP, you also get to take some of those tokens out of the bag, making the campaign easier. Now again, this leads to an effect where the front end of the campaign is harder than the back half of the campaign, because on the first scenario, you start off with this really, really ugly Chaos Bag. And if you manage it well over the first 4 or 5 scenarios, you can get rid of a lot of those nasty tokens. You can even add in an extra +1 token. So we had 2 +1s in our bag. And that makes everything you do just that much easier. So again, just how I mentioned with XP that the front end of the campaign is a lot harder because you've only got a limited XP pool, you also got a tougher Chaos Bag to work with. So again, it's front loading the difficulty to the first half of the campaign. Some of the other features in the campaign include keys, tidal tunnels, and flooding. Now, keys are very straightforward. They represent objectives, usually in the form of an object. And normally you're allowed to pick up a key once you've taken all the clues off a location. And sometimes you can take them off enemies. And keys normally work to either give you a special power or there's gated information or access behind a key. So a lot of flashbacks work by taking a key to a specific place. So the idea of keys is great, and it's an excellent thing to add into the developer's toolbox for making scenarios for Arkham Horror. The problem is they're in practically every single scenario here, so they kind of lose their impact pretty quickly. They're a cool idea and they allow for some fun gameplay and story elements to be happening, but I don't think they should be used in every scenario. And that leads me into the tidal tunnels and flooding. So in a lot of the scenarios in this campaign, you have these tidal tunnel locations. And they're not connected with location markers like most locations are in Arkham Horror. A lot of these maps are just orthogonally connected. So you're connected to the locations up and down and left and right from your current one. The problem is this gets a little bit samey, and you see these tidal tunnels in over half the scenarios. There's also another system where you place flooding tokens on locations to represent whether they've got some water in them or if they're completely flooded. And being stuck in a flooded location at the end of your turn is pretty bad news because, you don't have gills. But again, these are cool ideas that get used too much in the campaign. So the tidal tunnels, flooding, and keys, they're all really cool the first few times you get them in the campaign. By the time you get to the finale, you're like, okay, we've seen tidal tunnels, we've seen flooding, and we've seen keys. We've seen all that stuff before. And the finale revolves around those 3 things. So I guess this brings me to my core problem with the Innsmouth conspiracy. And that is that it's a lot of great ideas, but not necessarily enough great ideas for 8 missions. And there could have been a bit more variety here. Especially with the last 2 scenarios that I thought were a bit naff. So let's talk about the actual scenarios. The first scenario is the Pit of Despair, and this might be my favorite opener I've played yet. It is straight drama right from the start. You wake up in a cave, and you got to get the hell out of there as the place is filling with water. This is the first time you see tidal tunnels, it's the first time you see keys, and it's the first time you deal with flooding. And they're all immediately impactful. This opener is just really exciting. It's fast-paced, and you have barely enough time to do everything you need to get the keys to get the hell out of there. You leave the Pit of Despair just buzzing because it was such a close, tight, nasty scenario. It's also the first time you encounter the Deep Ones, and the Deep Ones in this campaign have a thing when they engage you, they do stuff to you. Whether it's damage, horror, or make you discard a card. That means you have to be really cagey about, okay, am I going to pull that guy off my friend and take the engagement damage? Or do I just take the risk and try stabbing him and maybe damage my friend? The whole Deep One thing about engagement just shakes up how you deal with them. And another thing about Pit of Despair is it goes after your health and it goes after your sanity real hard out. So not only is there a fast doom clock, there's the timer from flooding, and then there's a timer from essentially the amount of damage you're taking. And if you're playing a pretty squishy character and you're not running allies and don't have any kind of healing, you can get overwhelmed in Pit of Despair pretty quickly. It's just a really exciting opening scenario. And it leads straight into the vanishing of Alina Harper. This is a scenario where you learn about the town of Innsmouth. So you go all around Innsmouth and you're asking questions and you're trying to figure out who's kidnapped Alina Harper and where is she being kept. Now, Alina Harper is a federal agent, and her disappearance is the reason for you coming to Innsmouth. And I love how this scenario builds the town up. And it's a very clue-driven scenario compared to the previous one that was very fisty. And sometimes the investigation mechanic just kind of breaks down and you don't get enough clues, or you don't draw the right things from the investigation deck to determine accurately where Alina Harper's being kept and who's holding her, despite having hoovered up every single clue from the board. And I imagine that could get very frustrating. Still, a very cool scenario for how it paints the town of Innsmouth, and for showing how Innsmouth is part of a conspiracy. This is, of course, the first flashback scenario, which then takes you through to Into Deep, where you return to Innsmouth as Innsmouth is being overrun by Deep Ones. This is an absolute top tier scenario. This is a whale of a time. There's hideous time pressure in order to get off the map. There's so many different setbacks that happen in this scenario. There's surprises in the middle of town. It's tough. And if you want to get all of the keys and all of the flashbacks on this scenario, you have to do a lot of fighting and a lot of clue getting. This is a rough scenario that will test practically any group. And I really like that it shows the town that you visited before just in a very different light. And it has this real palpable tension as you're desperately trying to get to your cars and get the hell out of Dodge. That brings us to Into Deep, which is a scenario that introduces vehicles, in this case a boat. Now the setup is, you're out on a boat and you're going to different islands trying to find clues. And traveling between the islands is very, very difficult without the boat. So while the boat's efficient moving around, it's a magnet for terror and monsters. This is a cool scenario because it does different things with the map. The introduction of the boat's quite interesting because when one player's on one island, which is a totally different, disconnected set of tiles over here from the other investigators are on a different set of tiles here, you feel like you are ages apart. And you are, like, if you had to move yourself from one island to the other, it could take you 2 whole turns, drowning along the way. In our first playthrough of this one, where I was playing Tony Morgan, I also had a very exciting showdown with the big bad boss monster of this scenario, out in the boat by myself, armed only with a switchblade. That's where Tony apparently dived off the boat, went under the ocean with a switchblade, and murdered the giant monster. A very, very fun, dramatic, exciting moment. And at this point of the campaign, I thought the Innsmouth conspiracy was absolutely brilliant. I was really on a high here. I'd enjoyed all 4 of the previous scenarios. The vanishing of Alina Harper had, the Cluedo element to it was a little bit naff, but the other 3 scenarios here had been really fun. And then we got into horror in high gear, the 5th scenario. And that brings us to horror in high gear, a scenario I didn't really care much for. This one's about cars. And you get in the cars and there's a whole bunch of locations that will be arranged out in front of you. So you start driving and you flip over locations and then you'll keep flipping them over and then locations will drop off behind you. Now my problem with this one is I didn't really feel like there was a lot of choice here. You just kind of kept moving forward and dealing with whatever popped up in front of you. And a lot of the encounter deck is just test X, take a lot of damage. Test X, your car blows up. Even though you're driving, you feel like passengers in this scenario. Neither of my playthroughs of Horror in High Gear, I felt like I really made a difference. It was how well the deck was put together to start with and whatever I drew from the bag. I didn't feel like I made many choices. That brings us to the 6th scenario, A Light in the Fog, which is absolutely great. This one you're going to a lighthouse and then the lighthouse keeper tries to murderize you. This has a lot of elements that make the Unspeakable Oath from Carcosa really a great scenario. There's a moment where you're like, oh wow, we're screwed and we need to work really fast or we're all going to die. And the baddie is a memorable baddie and he interacts with the characters in a different way than most. So Light in the Fog was a real bright spark in the second half of the campaign. Even though it was the 3rd time we'd seen the tidal tunnels. They were used in quite an interesting way here. And there was a neat minigame about pumping water, so you could have some locations flooded and others not. So far we're up to scenario 6, and there's been 4 absolutely excellent scenarios. 1 good scenario, and 1 I didn't care for. But then we have the last 2. And I'm just going to run through these real quick. The last 2 scenarios are pretty average. The 7th scenario, the Lair of Dagon, it's all a Doom pressure scenario. So many things spawn that have Doom on them. If you can't deal with them, the Doom clock's going to advance. There was an opportunity here as well to explore the Esoteric Order of Dagon, which is one of the iconic things from the Innsmouth lore. This is the sinister group of cultist town people who are behind everything. And you start off by going into the temple, and then you're in the tidal tunnels. You're in the tidal tunnels, there's flooding mechanics, and you're using keys again. And the way the scenario fits in the story is this is the final flashback scenario. So you're always essentially going to lose this one. Regardless of the outcome, you get knocked on the back of the head and you end up in the pit of despair. Which is another reason why I think the idea of the flashbacks is cool as an idea, but not necessarily that much fun when you're playing through the scenario. Because yeah, this scenario, you are doomed to fail, even if you win it. Narratively, it is always a loss, and I think that kind of sucks. And that brings us to the final scenario, Into the Maelstrom. And we had the weirdest thing happen with the scenario. So on the act card, it says if you have all 4 keys, advance the act. And we started the game with all 4 keys because we'd done quite well in the previous mission. And this felt really wrong to us. So we looked up online and yeah, that's as it's printed, how it's supposed to work. But then we found a designer note that said, oh, actually you've got the choice of advancing. It doesn't automatically happen. But it's just very weird to set up a scenario and be told, oh yeah, advance straight away. And the opening of a scenario is tidal tunnels and keys and flooding. And you move on to a second act, which is just flooding and keys. So you have to use the keys to do things with flooding. And by this point in the campaign, we're kind of over that. You also had the initial terror of, oh no, it's Dagon and Hydra, but they didn't really do anything. Just kind of sat there, and once we'd put down enough keys, they were kind of neutered, and we just beat them up. And there's a quirk in the scenario that if you beat on Dagon heavily, you can take the damage and use that to unflood sections. So, yeah, Tony Morgan just kind of jumped on him with a switchblade and just stabbed him until the land dried out. It's very odd. Very, very odd finale. And in the end, I was a little underwhelmed. That's a quick run through of the 8 scenarios. But overall thoughts on the campaign. Now, I've bitched and moaned about tidal tunnels and about keys and about the sameness of the Innsmouth conspiracy. And I think that is a genuine problem with the campaign. The first 6 missions, my issues with horror and high gear aside, that's great. That's as good a first sort of 2/3 of a campaign as you've got for any of the campaigns we've played. Pit of Despair, In Too Deep, Devil's Reef, and the Lighthouse one. They're great scenarios. Those 4 are absolutely fantastic scenarios. The last 2 they're not very good at all, and it just makes the campaign whimper out. And also, as I mentioned way earlier, you do the first half with less XP, and you do the first half with a harder chaos bag. So all of the excitement and tension is really just front-loaded in this campaign. If it had sustained it, it would be absolutely amazing, but it just kind of drops off. And it's frustrating in so many ways, because if Innsmouth had a great finale, it had a great 7th and 8th mission, this would have been as good as Carcosa, because the first half, I think, is as good as Path to Carcosa. But Path to Carcosa has a really good 7th scenario and a pretty good 8th one, and Innsmouth Conspiracy doesn't. And while I think Innsmouth and Carcosa both do have a bunk scenario, Carcosa's one is very early on, and it's jammed between The Last King and The Unspeakable Oath, which are both awesome. So you kind of, can forgive it. But when 3 of your last 4 scenarios are, at best, not great for the campaign. I'd still replay it. I still think it's a good, fun time. I do think this is a very good campaign, and I'm probably being very harsh on the finale because my expectations were so high going into those last 2 scenarios. Because after A Light in the Fog, I was like, this is the best campaign ever. This is fantastic. This has topped Carcosa. And yeah, then it just peters out and dies like a damp squib at the end. Very quickly, I'll run through a couple of tips, I think, if you're going to run through the Innsmouth Conspiracy that would help you through. The first one is, be ready to take a lot of damage. There's going to be sanity damage, there's going to be damage. There's just going to be a lot of it coming at you all the way through the campaign. Another good suggestion is to have some travel cards that sort of break the travel rules. Open Gate in particular can really throw open some scenarios like Devil's Reef. Another good bit of advice is to take cards and effects that stop things from engaging you. So whether that's evade effects that last longer than one round, or things that just move monsters around, or prevent them from entering into your region. Anything that stops you getting engaged and re-engaged is very handy in Innsmouth. There's not that many really big chunky enemies in Innsmouth. It's not like stacked full of things that have 6 health, but there's a lot of different deep ones and a lot of different creatures that will just sort of somewhat swarm you. So having the ability to deal with a lot of different targets is really good. And things like Dynamite Blast can really shine here as well. So a very quick run through of the deck I used in our main campaign. I was playing Tony Morgan, and Tony Morgan is filthy. He's so damn good. I did most of the campaign solely with Switchblade 2. In the last couple of scenarios, I didn't even bother bringing the guns out. I didn't need them. What I focused on instead was extra actions. So I put a lot of XP into Honed Instinct, which is one of the customizable cards, that allowed me to get 2 extra actions. I also had Double, which allowed me to double an event. So if I played Honed Instinct, I could get 4 extra actions. I also had Swift Reflexes, which could pay for extra actions as well, and I could double that as well. And Haste, which allowed you to take extra actions. So when I did encounter a big bad, sure, I was only using a Switchblade, but I was using it like 8 times in one turn. And that can put out a heck of a lot of damage. Tony's really simple to run that way. You just give him a basic weapon like Switchblade, and you just let him go. You give him lots of actions, and, with Lonnie, Ritter, and the Switchblade, he's starting at 8. And sometimes he's only doing 1 damage. Most of the time he's doing 2. But who cares when you're attacking 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times? Add in some vicious blows, sweeping kicks, and strong arms, and you got a little bit of extra damage there as well. Very simple deck to run. I was also running Glory for card draw and Payday for money. Not that I really needed it because the deck ran efficiently using mostly just a Switchblade. And because this deck was so efficient with its money, I ran Streetwise 3, which allowed me to spend money to boost my book or boost my foot. So we did need to evade something, or if we did need me to flex and do some investigating, I could because I had the resources to power this. And sure, you're spending 2 resources to get the 6th book, but if you need the clues, it's worth doing it. And I wasn't spending the resources on anything else. Also, with Lonnie Ritter and a leather coat, he was basically impossible to kill, because she can heal damage off the leather coat and heal sanity off herself. The only time I had any problems with Tony was the one game where I didn't draw a weapon until the very end of the game. So yeah, I'm sure someone can make a far better and far stronger Tony deck, but this really simple concept of Switchblade plus actions did really, really well. So that's the end of the review. The Innsmouth Conspiracy came tantalizingly close to being my favorite Arkham Horror experience to date. And I really do wish it finished just a bit stronger than it did. Now I know I've been a little bit harsh on this campaign, probably a little too harsh to be honest, because I did enjoy it. But I suppose it's always the last memories that are the freshest. And my final memory of this campaign was kind of being a little bit, that's it when we finished the campaign. Now, I don't think every campaign finale needs to be something new, innovative, and interesting, but Into the Maelstrom in particular just went over the same ground as previous scenarios. And I guess this campaign, like this review, is just going to end with a bit of a bum note. Now, apparently there is a fan-made return to Innsmouth Horror on the Ancient Evil site, and I'll put links to that in the description below if you have played through the Innsmouth Conspiracy, had similar issues to me, and want to check out how someone might do a return to for the Innsmouth Conspiracy. Because I'm pretty sure we're not going to see an official one come out anytime soon, if at all. Alright, join us back here in a couple of months where we'll be covering the Feast of Hemlock Vale. And until next time, like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
If I were a deep one, blub 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 blub. All day long I'd swim beneath the sea. If I were a deep one, terrify the tourists. Blub 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 blub. If I were a nicky icky fish, scaly slippery frog-eyed kind of man.